Hello and welcome to Ahval Podcasts, the home of objective, up-to-date and independent reporting on Turkey. Don't forget to follow our reports through social media, on ahvalnews.com or through our mobile app. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome. This is Ilhan Tanir, Executive Director for the Ahval News. Today we have a special guest, Ms. Repucci, Senior Director for Research and Analysis at the Freedom House, and she manages Freedom in the World and Freedom of the Press publications. Welcome to the program, Sarah.
Thank you. Great to be here.
We are so happy to have you today. You just published a report within last couple of days. It's called Freedom and the Media. I just want to first ask you to hear from you. What are your main findings in the report in this year?
Yeah, sure. So we've noted a decline in press freedom globally over the past decade. And what we're seeing is an increasing trend of democracies who are seeing declines in press freedom. This is especially worrying with the rise of right-wing populism that we're seeing across the world and how that's having an impact on democracies. We're especially worried because of the impact that press freedom can have on global democracy and of what that's going to mean for the future.
I read the report. You also spent some time on Turkey and different discussions over Turkey. Before going into Turkey, we see these authoritarian regimes across the world, and you talk about it in your report, from Venezuela to Russia and many other countries, including Hungary in Europe, and different populist leaders. Can you explain to us this fight between the authoritarian regimes and the press freedom and press news outlets in many different countries, and specifically also in Turkish space? How do you see this fight unfolding?
Yeah, so we see basically a struggle between these regimes that, even though they appear to have such complete control over the political system, they continue to find new ways to crack down on the press at home. This has been a trend over this past decade, but we continue to see it. This year, the countries with the greatest declines in press freedom were countries at the bottom end of the spectrum. Turkey fits with this trend because it's also one of our weaker performers, and it also is continuing to see new threats to the press. We have this struggle in Turkey between a regime that depends on controlling information in order to stay in power, and an educated population with a strong history of fighting back that is using any means that it can to resist this repression.
Since the coup attempt, you also talk about in the report, it's such a wide and detailed report, by the way. I benefited a lot reading through it. How do you think the critical media in Turkey, since the coup attempt last 3 years, which 2 of those years Turkey lived under the state of emergencies, just came out last July or August. How do you think critical media is pushing back? It is getting stronger, or it is being cracked down? How do you see that?
Yeah, so we've seen a really steep constricting of freedom in Turkey since 2016. And the press are the main, or some of the main victims of that. And Turkey is facing a pretty dire situation right now in terms of press freedom, with the number of news outlets that have been shut down and harassment of journalists. But we're also seeing the internet as a really important island of information for Turkey. And we've seen many media professionals like yourself who have moved online. We have, many examples of this. Startups like Dokuseki's, which are modeling this new digital-first version of reporting. Mediascope moving to a YouTube channel. Journalists who were forced to leave the country, who have been able to report from abroad through social media. And of course, all of these means are officially blocked, but they're still accessible on most social media platforms through WhatsApp and from VPNs. So Turkey has really done a remarkable job of being innovative in the face of this crackdown and this censorship, and finding ways to get the information out there.
Many people, or some people, have been arguing that these new outlets you have both mentioned in your report and you talk about a little bit now, they are restricted and limited within opposition echo chamber, and they cannot reach out to the other part of the political spectrum. And namely, when we talk about Turkey, the pro-government base or supporters. Do you have any kind of findings that these critical medias are influential in other political spectrum as well?
I mean, I can't say specifically, but I would say that, of course, politics in Turkey are very polarized, and the media are no exception to that. I mean, it's true here in the United States to some extent as well. I think this is a movement in many countries. But having said that, the important thing is that these platforms are getting information out there. When you have a regime with the kind of dictatorial nature of the AKP, the natural outcome should be that information on abuse of power is not available. And that's not the case in Turkey. This information is still out there. So whether that information is reaching everybody or not, there is this investigative reporting. There is this kind of reporting going on. And that's what's really important and is what is really a success for Turkey.
I understand. You said that a dictatorial I forgot exactly.
Dictatorial nature.
I was trying to remember. Yes, dictatorial nature of this regime. You didn't use authoritarian. Turkey is usually, or Turkish government and the pro-government media do not like to be called or likened to dictatorial nature of the regime. How do you make this distinction when it comes to Turkey?
No, that's a good point, and I am using that in a broad sense. I think that Turkey is not a dictatorship. It still has elections, but it's more these characteristics of the regime that seem to be modeled on much more authoritarian systems. So what's happening in Turkey is still evolving, but Turkey has dropped to not free in our Freedom in the World report. It is among some of the most repressive regimes in the world, and that's what I was referring to.
Turkey, just a decade ago, was pointed as one of the examples that can show that a Muslim country can be democratic, can be progressive, can improve rule of law, can improve the freedom of press. And Turkey showed that it is progressing in the Freedom House Index as well, but in many other respected indexes at the time. But something happened for the last few years. My question is, do you have a similar story of a country like Turkey once made a very good leap, then reverse back to the authoritarian regime?
Yeah, so a country with a similar trajectory, but of course it's a very different country, is Nicaragua. Nicaragua, like Turkey, has had a very turbulent relationship with democracy. In the 1980s, Turkey elected a government that severely restricted political rights and civil liberties, and it fell to not free in our ratings. And then by the 1990s, Nicaragua appeared to be on a democratic trajectory and reached our free status. And now Nicaragua is not free again. So Turkey is not unique in that sense. But a big difference is that IFA is a newer party with a different vision for the political system than its military predecessors. And Nicaragua returned to the type of regime that it had seen before under a president who had also served under that previous time period. I think that the main lesson in any of these cases is that democracy is never an endpoint. It's always something that needs to be nurtured if it's going to remain stable and continue to grow.
Thank you for that. You also mentioned about the explosion of criminal cases for mainly the insulting a Turkish president. But despite that, Turkish people continue to speak up on social media, many of them doing their own Periscope broadcasts from their internet to their followers, and they continue to speak up. How do you think this is happening when Turkey is being compared to other countries such as Russia or China? I think, according to experts who follow those countries, they do not see the kind of a lively social media and critical nature of the opposition or average citizen in those countries. Why do you think this is happening in Turkey?
I think it has to do with Turkey's history and the fact that it has such a long history of democratic openings, even if they've always been problematic or faced crackdowns and then openings. I think that journalists in Turkey see this as part of their heritage and part of what they are a part of, that they are going to face crackdowns, they might go to jail, and that's part and parcel of what they're trying to do. And I think that energy in Turkey is part of what keeps it going, even though there are some of the harshest crackdowns that we see anywhere in the world. The techniques that are being used in Turkey are among the worst, but the vibrancy of the media continues to be much above, just like you said, much above what we're seeing in what might otherwise be peer countries, China and Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, which have, similar censorship regimes and similar attempts, journalists in jail, but the people haven't been able to fight back nearly as much as they have in Turkey.
Thank you so much again for this report. Freedom House really is one of those international watchdogs that I know many of the Turkish journalists and many others have a lot of admiration for the work you are doing. Last time I interviewed Karen Karliker then in 2014. And at that time, there were some attacks on Freedom House for the report it came out that year. And I must say, some of those Turkish journalists who attacked Freedom House, and now they found themselves in opposition side, and now they are criticizing Turkey's freedom of press. Is very interesting irony there. I have one question to finish. there are still attacks on organizations like Freedom House from Turkey, especially pro-government media and the government circles, that, Freedom House is the organization is created by the Western government to attack the countries like Turkey because they don't like what Turkey is becoming, and so on and so forth, those conspiracy theories. Do you have any comment to those criticism, even though it's being laughed at here, but it's very, very widespread countries like Turkey?
Yeah, I mean, it's very common that we are attacked by governments around the world. It's not any particular kind of government that we're going after. It doesn't matter what the dominant religion is or the ethnic makeup of the country. We have a standard methodology. It's based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We have people from all over the world who are contributing to this. But I think that the kinds of attacks on Freedom House that we hear are frequently because we touch a nerve in the country. The government doesn't like to hear this, and they don't want to hear the criticism, and then they get defensive. So I think it's a sign that we're doing our job and we're getting the message out there. And I hope that that we can continue to support the work that you're doing, and that things will turn around in Turkey.
Again, thank you for coming on, and thank you also mentioning Ahval in your report. We are very proud to be recorded in your report, organization that we have deep admiration. Today we had a special guest, Sarah Repucci from Freedom House, and her latest report can be found at Ahval. We had a creation of the news, but also the full report at the Freedom House website titled Freedom and the Media. Thanks so much for coming on. Hope to talk to you again in the future.
Thank you so much.